two parallel structures, one for tackle football and one for flag football. And then there is an overarching IFAF rules committee that is responsible for maintaining the standards of both. So at each level, we operate with rules contacts in national federations. I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed that not every national federation engages in that process. I suspect that may be because national federations don't pass the information on to their rules people or their officiating people who are perhaps responsible for it in their country. But typically we get about 20 countries a year engaged in the rule process at both tackle and flag level. And then things come up through those, they make suggestions, we vote on them, and the final list of changes gets sent to the IFAF Executive Board for ratification. Okay, so let's move on to what is happening in the world of rule changes this year. We've got 17 rule changes, 10 of which we've inherited from NCAA, and then 7 that we've made ourselves, but for 3 of those, they were sort of inspired by NCAA changes. We've implemented them in a slightly different way. So let's move on to particular rule changes. And I'm looking at them today from an official's point of view. If I was making this presentation to coaches or teams, I'd do these things in a slightly different order. But from an officiating point of view, the one that we're most likely to have happen to us on a game-by-game basis is the change to the substitution rule. Now, it used to be that if Team B had more than 11 players on the field, as officials, we had to wait until just before the ball was snapped and then throw our flag. That was obviously complicated. And sometimes we didn't throw the flag before the ball was snapped. We didn't notice the 12th player until the ball was live. And so the rules had to cater for the possibility that this would become a live ball foul. So it's been simplified so that the new rule essentially makes more than 11 players on the field a live ball foul. You wait until the ball is snapped and then throw your flag and enforce it like any other live ball foul. This should simplify things. However, there's one exception to this, which in the NCAA rulebook is only reflected in an approved ruling, but we like to make sure that our rules are consistent with our approved rulings and vice versa. We try to avoid making new rules in an approved ruling. So we've got an addition to the substitution rule that says that if the play clock runs out and Team B has more than 11 players on the field, then the foul is against Team B for substitution infraction, not against Team A for a delay of game. So in that one, and I would say pretty rare occasion, we are well, we're consistent with NCAA. We just get to that point from a different point, different starting point. Okay. So a couple of changes. These come from NCAA about extra periods, because the concern there is that tired players are more likely to suffer an injury. And a player who is, players who've been playing multiple periods of extra time will be even more tired than usual. So a couple of changes are intended to shorten the game and achieve a result in fewer plays. So these changes are in two parts. The first one is that it used to be the case that from the third extra period onwards, teams that scored a touchdown had to go for a 2-point try. If they kicked a field goal, it didn't count. But now that has been brought forward, and they have to do that if the game goes into a second extra period. But perhaps the more significant change is that if you do get to a third extra period, instead of the old style, the normal extra period style of having a 1st and 10 from Team B's 25-yard line, each extra period will now become just one 2-point try down. So it's going to basically reduce each extra period to 1 play per team. Occasionally an extra one if a foul requires a play to be repeated. So this should speed things up. It should achieve a result much more quickly. NCAA reported that while they had very few games that went into a third extra period, I think in the season just gone, they only had one game that went much beyond the third extra period, and that took about 9 or 10 extra periods to cover. Okay. A couple of changes to the rules on extending periods. So as well as the existing reasons about extending a period if the period ends with a play that has a live ball foul in it, or if we have an inadvertent whistle or something like that. A couple of things added to the list. One is a rare occasion where the end of the period coincides with a score. NCAA have always had a rule that allowed the period to be extended in order to get the next play in after the try. But a couple of years ago, they changed their rule to have penalties on successful field goals in certain circumstances carry over to the next play. So now there is an option to extend the period to include that. And then something that we've added is that you may need to extend a period if the play during which time expired had an illegal touching violation on it. So a scenario here would be, let's say that as time expired in the fourth quarter, Team A committed a foul in their own end zone intentionally. Then the subsequent kickoff, they could just tap the ball forward a yard and die on it, and Team B would never have the opportunity to touch the ball. So by giving the option of extending the period violation, we can cover that. There are one or two people who are not on mute. Sebastian, can you please mute your microphone? Thank you.
Sorry about that.
So there are also situations where the offended team has the option of whether to extend the period or not. That applies on the illegal touching violation. It also applies on the situation where the penalty on the last play of the period has a loss of down option. Okay, let's move on to targeting. Now, I know Bill is going to talk about it in more detail later, but we have made a rule change here which sort of reflects a change that NCAA made a couple of years ago. because what they did was they said instant replay must review all targeting calls, and there must be evidence to confirm the call of targeting for targeting to stick. Now, obviously, in the vast majority of our games, we don't have the benefit of replay or a video judge. So what can we do best to reflect that extra level of certainty that NCAA achieved by having a replay confirmation? And the answer is we can simply remove the words "when in question it is a foul" from both Rule 913 and 914. And when we next produce an edition of the Manual of Football Officiating, we'll change the "when in doubt" principle that is in there as well.
Jim, can I just come in there for a second? I think
Yeah.
Bill Lamonier had a question regarding this rule change. Bill?
All right. Yeah, I assumed that was the premise that the rule change was made on, that you were trying to line it up as best as possible. And the key thing in here is we're not trying to minimize player safety with this about a "when in doubt." We're just trying to basically take away a stands call. And would you agree that that we're trying to get officials to recognize when you have doubt? And if you have doubt on this type of a call, or somebody's trying to take you off of it, you have doubt, don't be stubborn.
Yeah, yeah. And it's important to think about, how much doubt do you have? And we're not looking for a standard of absolute certainty, but we are looking for a standard of at least highly likely. There is a section in chapter 6 of the MOFO that explains what we mean by "when in doubt," and that uses the words "reasonably sure." But I've been impressed by the way in which during the COVID pandemic, the scientific advisors to the British government have expressed the certainty about the scientific evidence that they're passing on. And so at the bottom of this slide, you will see a diagram that they include in many of their official documents, which explains what the terminology that they use reflects in terms of certainty. So it goes from almost certain at the top end to remote chance at the bottom end. I think what we're looking for targeting is a standard of highly likely. So, if it's 80% or higher that you think you're right, you're pretty sure, but you might not be sure, but you're pretty sure, then we want you still to call that as targeting.
If we go to a tournament, Jim, where we have a replay, do we change how we officiate this, or we still do it the same?
We still do the same, because the thing that concerns us is that while we might have replay, we might not have the choice of camera angles that NCAA typically get, and therefore we will have a lot of play on the field stands situations. And so, it's important that we get, as best we can as officials, the call on the field right in the first place. Okay, replay can help us with obvious mistakes that we make, but it may be that it can't help us with close calls.
Okay, thank you. No more questions at the moment, Jim.
Yeah, okay, let me move on then. A couple of things about penalty enforcement. First of all, a statement that just says that penalties after a touchdown or field goal, if necessary, they can carry over to the succeeding spot in extra periods. I think everybody assumed that that was always the case, but that's now become explicit in the rules. But one change that we have made is that when you have a foul after a change of possession on a try or on an extra period play, in the past, the rule has said that those fouls are cancelled by rule, except for a list which included flagrant personal fouls and unsportsmanlike conduct. But it was the feeling of the Rules Committee that we would like all personal fouls, not just flagrant ones, to carry forward in that case. So we've amended the rule, basically just take out the word flagrant, and now under those circumstances, again, it's a rare scenario, but under those circumstances, those personal fouls will be enforced. A few changes to player numbering and equipment. One that I think a lot of players are waiting for is that 0 is now a legal jersey number. It seems to be a big deal for a lot of players, and when you're watching video clips, there does seem to be an unnaturally high number of player zeros involved in them. It's not much of an effort from the officials' point of view, but perhaps something to think about if you're responsible for running officiating systems in your country. If you've got an IT system that has previously checked that player numbers were in the range 1 to 99, you need to go and check and change that system to recognize 0. About jerseys, players are now allowed to wear more than one jersey at the same time. So this is there really to facilitate players who need to play more than one position, may have more than one number. And so they can wear the 2 jerseys and just take one shirt off when they want to change number. Of course, that doesn't change the need for them to report to the referee and for the referee to inform the opposing team when a number change happens. And another rule change about jerseys or anything underneath a jersey, such as a t-shirt, they should be tucked into the pants. To clarify, to make things easier to read, the numbers on a jersey should be centered on the back and front, and there shouldn't be any logos that obscure the numbers. We've said leave at least an inch space around. There's also a rule change about the foul, the penalty for a foul, for if the visiting team isn't wearing a legitimate colour. The existing rule, which I confess I've never had the opportunity to enforce, but the existing rule is that you enforce a 15-yard penalty after the opening kickoff play of each half. But they've now ramped up that penalty to include a charged timeout at the start of each quarter. So before the opening kickoff of the half and before the first play of the 3rd and 4th quarters, you would charge the team with a timeout. If they haven't got a timeout at that point, then it would be a 5-yard delay of game penalty. Now, whenever we talk about jersey or equipment rules, we always get asked about our philosophy on when to call them and when not to call them. And that hasn't changed, it's not changing. For things like players who don't have their t-shirt tucked in, it's just a talk to. Tell them, remind them to do it, and they will probably do it. If the numbers on the jersey aren't centered, what are you going to do? You're not going Are you going to not play the game? No, you play the game and report it. The only one on here that you would have to apply is the jersey colour foul. But then again, you've got judgment to make about whether the colours clash. And if you can reasonably say that they don't clash, then you're not going to have this foul. So our philosophy has always been that we will try and accommodate the players and the teams as much as possible. We will talk to them, we'll advise them, we'll encourage them to up their standards. But at the end of the day, we are not the fashion police. NCAA have had an issue recently with feigning injuries. So they added a section to Rule 3 that allows officials or teams to report instances where they think a player may have been pretending to be injured. Obviously, there are situations near the end of a half where having an injury timeout would benefit a team by stopping the clock for a while they regroup or get their substitutions sorted out. We thought we should take that a bit further because occasionally it is possible to deduce during a game that a player is feigning an injury. Now, it's always been possible to penalise players for feigning injuries under the unsportsmanlike conduct rule, but we've added that explicitly. And hopefully that will deter teams from thinking about it as a tactic. There's a safety rule about the long snapper on a kick attempt. They're still vulnerable to injury, so we're trying to make the situation a bit safer for them. So if team A is in a scrimmage kick formation, so this applies both to punts and field goal attempts, then any team B player who is less than a yard back from the line of scrimmage must be outside the frame of the body of the snapper. So if you look at the diagram at the bottom of the screen there, you'll see that the blue player is fine because he's back by more than a yard from the line of scrimmage. The green player is also fine because he is lined up just outside the frame of the body of the snapper. But the red player is in an illegal position. His body overlaps with the frame of the body of the snapper. If he moved a little bit to his right, he would be okay. But if he remains in his position, then that would be a flag at the snap. This isn't one we're going to have anything to do about, but just to note that the field markings now extend the team area and coaching box to the 20-yard line. I know that in some countries, a temporary COVID rule change extended that even further. In Britain, we give the team area down to the 10-yard line. But this looks like it's going to be a permanent change and will exist beyond the COVID era. A couple of changes that relate to you as a video judge on the rare occasion when you are one. There's a situation that might arise where Team A could gain an advantage, most particularly at the end of the game, by asking for a review with either after as time expired in the fourth quarter. So if the clock would start on the ready for play after the replay, in order for them not to gain an unfair advantage by having the review, there has to be at least 3 seconds left on the clock. So if after review there are only 2 or 1 second left on the clock and the clock starts on the ready, then by rule, the half the game will be over. So it just closes that little loophole. Let me just mention some editorial changes that are worth noting. The first one is that lighting system operators are now subject to the rules. I think in a game in the States, somebody turned the lights out or made it difficult for the offense to see. So that has been changed. A couple of years ago, we introduced a rule to explain what a displaced pylon was. And we've revised that slightly just to emphasize the fact that if the pylon is displaced and part of it is in the field of play and part of it is in the end zone, it's only if the ball or a player touches the part that's in the end zone that the provisions of the rule apply. So the other bits of the pylon are still out of bounds, but they're not in the end zone. Something that we haven't had as a problem yet, but we envisage we might have one day, and that is people listening in to us on our radios. We've made that an explicit penalty. Anyone who eavesdrops on the officials without permission would be disqualified. Obviously, that isn't something we can do to spectators. They're outside our jurisdiction, but at least this covers anybody associated with the teams. Thing about tees on free kicks. If there is a kicking tee, the ball must be touching it. That doesn't mean to say that the ball has to be set on the tee, but some part of the ball must be touching some part of the tee. Otherwise, the kicking tee has to be removed. A minor change of wording in the rule that covers Team A players going out of bounds during a kick play. Previously, it said a kick down, and now it says a kick play. So what that means is that this rule doesn't apply once the kick return starts. So anybody who goes out of bounds at that point can legally come back into the field of play. The next one is about forward handing. There was a slight difference in the rules about handing the ball forward after you've been across the neutral zone, but that's now been brought in line. So the rule is the same as the one that applies to restricting a forward passer from throwing a pass after they've been entirely across the neutral zone in possession of the ball. And then in connection with the rules on leaping and leveraging, this now covers apparent kicks as well as real kicks. We've tweaked the penalty for rules 941 and 944. So these are ones that apply to illegal batting. So it used to say if there's no loss of down when kick is beyond the neutral zone, but we've clarified that to say when a legal kick, scrimmage kick, has crossed the neutral zone. So the no loss of down provision will apply continually after the ball has crossed the neutral zone, even if by some means it bounces or gets blown back. And I think finally we've added 3 additional plays to the list of things that can be reviewed. So the judgment about whether a ball was passed or fumbled can be reviewed. Whether a fumble on a fourth down play, for example, was recovered by the fumbler or by somebody else. And then also the rules about fair catches, so we can review to see whether a fair catch signal was made, and we can also review to see whether the ball was advanced after a catch or recovery. So that's all from me. I was just going to finish by saying that if you want a printed copy of the IFAF rulebook, it is available. If you go to the my IFOA website and follow that link, it'll give you links to a website called lulu.com, and you'll be able to order these. That really applies if you just want one copy for yourself. If you're ordering in bulk for your association, perhaps contact me for see whether we can find a cheaper way of doing things in bulk.
Okay,
Thanks very much.
I've got some questions for you, Jim, if you want to stop sharing the screen, and I'll just put it up for you. Not many questions, but I'll put the names of the person who asked the question. So there we go. Can you see that okay?
No, I can't, but I can see the question window, right? Right, Eric asked a question about the wording of Rule 1025A1. He actually emailed me about this on Friday, and I replied to him yesterday. This is an NCAA wording, and we'll see whether they make a change to it this year or not. Bart asks whether if the coaching boxes are painted from the 25, do we grant them the 20 or the painted lines? My inclination is to say go with the painted lines, but that might be best treated as a local issue. In my experience, teams tend not to spread out very much. You know, in Britain, we changed the COVID rules so they could go down to the 10-yard line. They didn't really spread out. They all stayed between the 30s or the 40s, huddled together, passed the disease on, perhaps, who knows. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that presentation, Jim. That was excellent. What we're going to do now is have a 5-minute break before Einar comes on. And so everyone have a 5-minute break, get yourself a cup of coffee or something, and be back within 5 minutes. See you soon. Okay, so ready to start again. I'm now going to hand you over to Einar Bolstad, our performance officer, and Einar will give you an update on the video review. Thanks, Einar, over to you.
All righty. Let's see if I can find the share screen button. I think you should be seeing something now. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's fine, Einar, fine.
Excellent. Okay. So good evening or good afternoon or whatever it might be in your neck of the woods. My name is Einar Bolstad, and I'm the performance officer of the IFAF Europe Officiating Committee. Performance officer is a very fancy title. It just means review guy, but it looks good on my many business cards, of which I have none. So this is what I'm going to talk about. It's going to be a fairly short presentation, about 30 minutes or so. This may be a roundabout way or perhaps the wrong order of things, but I'll start talking about some of the FOEs, or the FOs, which is a new acronym I came up with a few days ago, frequently observed errors for 2021. We won't go into very deep detail, but we'll talk about some observations that we've made over the past season. We'll talk about the average scores by position, which might be an interesting thing. It's a short thing, but I think it's quite interesting. We'll talk about the review group as it existed in 2021 and also going forward. And then, if time permits, but I think it will, I'll talk about how the system works just briefly. Now, perhaps I should have talked about that before I started talking about the results of the system, but I think most people have, at least Europeans, they know about the system to a certain degree, but I wanted to take the opportunity to spread a little bit of knowledge to those that are new and also those outside the borders of Europe. So here we go. Let's talk about the FOs to start with. So as you can see, these are very short, so we're not going to go into deep detail about this. There's certainly a lot to be said about all of these things, but let's focus on the main observations. Referees, common thing. Now, before I start, I should say that the data set, the season 2021 data set is very small. We just had a handful of 6 fully reviewed games in 2021. Obviously, the main reason is that the activity was low. There were a few IFAF games being played, and some we had issues with getting game film for. So there isn't a lot of meat on the bone, but there is some meat on the bone. So we're going to talk about the meat that we have. Referees waiting too long to wind the clock after out of bounds plays and first downs. Now, the rule says, of course, that the clock starts when the ball is ready for play, and the ball is ready for play when it's placed on the ground and the official walks away, and that's where we wind the clock. That is the rule. But as you know, the rule in many situations is a guideline more than a rule. This is one of those situations. The latest you should wind the clock is when the ball is put down on the ground. That should be the absolute latest time you start winding. And in fact, we would like you to start winding earlier. How early is going to be up to to your discretion. It's a game management tool. But for example, on a first down play, if you're the referee, the clock is killed, you signal first down, the chain starts moving, and the ball is going is in the process of being relayed to the umpire or center judge. The ball is on the way in. You can go ahead and wind the clock at that time. You don't have to wait longer than that. If you're in a blowout, you might just give the first down signal and go immediately into the wind straight away. That's going to be up to your discretion, but we want you to keep the game moving. Umpires not being prepared or reacting quick enough to substitutions. There is a section about this in the MOFO. Take a look at it, have a plan, be aware that this is a thing, be aware that you need to be alert to the signals of the referee and move quickly. Now, perhaps one of the reasons we're not as good at doing this as we should is that we don't have a lot of situational substitution in our game, perhaps, but I think it's getting to be something that we have to deal with more and more. And anyway, this is the rule that we need to be aware of, and we need to do this correctly. So be prepared. We sometimes see reactions that are way too slow. Sometimes we see referees not even signaling for the substitution mechanics to go into effect at all. So this could be a little bit on the referees as well. On an 8-man crew, the higher the number of officials, the more you need to focus on your own stuff. And you can talk about that for every position, focusing on your own stuff. But the umpires we see sometimes are letting go of their guard, center, guard trio a little bit too early. Obviously, this could be a clinic in itself. When do you transition from your initial keys and leave them and go to something else? That's not what this little session is about. But you need to be, and you need to take charge of your own guys and trust of your keys and trust that the other guys are on top of their own keys. Center judges not lining up wide enough. Sometimes we see them inside. Sometimes you see them straight lining behind the tackle, or sometimes even inside the tackle. We want you to be approximately as wide as the referee is on the referee's side. And again, the substitution thing, when we go to a center judge, the same thing applies to the center judge for substitution as it does to the umpires when they're in charge of it. Because on an 8-man crew, normally we would have the center judge responding to the substitution situations. And now I am attempting to move. Yes, there we go. Linesmen, not supervising chain crew, letting the chain crew do their own thing. Happens way too much. And we are lucky a lot of the time that this does not create any problems. We are just lucky that there was no flag on the play or something else that requires us to stay with our old line to gain the previous spot and so on. Too many linesmen are letting the chain crew do what they want at the time that they want, and that's something that we need to get better at. So chain crew should react only to the instructions and orders of the linesman, and that includes changing the down, moving the down box after play, and setting up for a new first down. And this also applies if you know them. Just be on top of this, because if this happens in one of your games and you're the linesman, the chain crew moves too early, it's never going to be the chain crew's fault. It's going to be the linesman's fault. So let's not get into a position where our relaxed approach to the chain crew creates a problem that we could easily have avoided with good mechanics. So get in charge of your chain crews. Sometimes a lot of times, I was actually surprised how many situations we had with linesmen and now also line judges on passing plays not holding until a pass is thrown or crossed the neutral zone. That was surprising to see how many officials who were not aware of that mechanic and started drifting, releasing at the snap, just like in a 5-man crew. I don't know if this is perhaps due to officials normally working in 5-man crews at home, and then all of a sudden finding themselves on a 6, 7, or 8-man crew. But whenever we change the crew size, mechanics change, And if you want to work an international game, certainly you have to be on top of those changes and also implement them in your game on the field. Deep wings and back judges. This is, of course, the difficult part of being a deep wing or back judge at all in every game. Not reacting quickly enough to passes, or what we see sometimes, deep officials being too focused on the key that they had at the start of the play and not realizing that someone is now moving into their zone, which who they should switch to, and that player is going deep and you're not going deep. We need to be aware of that. And also running plays treated as passing plays. Sometimes the ball is, we see deep officials, when the ball is snapped, they start backpedaling and they never really stop backpedaling until the play is over. That puts them in a situation where they are far away from the play, where we would like them to help out of bounds with dead ball coverage or relaying a ball. So that's another frequent thing that we have observed. All right. So average scores per position. Now the top score you can have in a game is 100. Getting 100 is, of course, technically possible because the system allows it, but it's practically very, very difficult to get 100. Anything in the 90s is a very good score. Anything above 80 is also quite good. If you get to the 60s, high 60s, hopefully not in too many games. If you start approaching low 60s, that's an issue. If you get into something in the 50s, then you're probably not ready for working international games. One comment about that is that one game is perhaps not sufficient. One score, one review is perhaps not sufficient to really to see how good of an official you are. I think we need about 3 games or so to see if this is a blip or if this is really you. After about 3 games, I would say we have a pretty good feeling of how good you are. Not many IFAF officials had more than 1 game reviewed last year, if any. We have some that have 2. So the scores, I think, for pretty much most officials, we're a little bit too early in this whole system to really have for example, a ranking list of our best officials, but we're not far away from it. Next season, or actually this season, 2022, I'm sure we'll have officials that will have about 3 reviews or so at the end of the season. And I think we might be able to, before next season, before 2023, to actually have a list of our top officials at each position. And I think it would be of interest to anyone to be on that list. So give it the old college trial, as Frank said. But anyway, here are the scores. As I said, these are based on 6 games, so we should take them with a grain of salt or some small amount of salt. I would say that I would hope that these would be higher. I think they should be higher. We don't have any average score in the 80s. And that is, or would have been, if we had more games, would have been a concern. I think we should wait until the end of 2022 to see how much of a concern it is, because as I said, 6 games is not a lot of games. So a couple of bad reviews, a couple of bad performances from some officials could really impact the average. But we'll compare it to the end of the season and see how we did under 2022, hopefully better. So if you had a review this year, you can compare yourself to the average of your position. Hopefully you're above. If not, well, there's a new season, new opportunities to climb. All right. So the review group in 2021 was only Frank and I. couple of reasons for that. We had a rather large list of names that did reviews. Some of them didn't get to do many reviews, especially when we went into 2021. I thought that the number of games would be way too small to make it to have any consistency in a large review group when you may not even get to do any game. So I decided 2021 would be a sort of a interim year, and Frank and myself did the reviews. So that meant that Frank did one half and I did it the other half. So two reviewers, have reviewed each reviewed game. And the reason why we do that, why we have more than one reviewer do each game, it's twofold. One, it gives us the possibility to have more, we have different skill sets. Like, I don't know much about deep officials. I know that they're there and I know that they're needed. At least that's what they tell me. I have some insight, but I'm more of a line of scrimmage guy. Well, Frank, he's a deep guy, and so on and so forth. So we have an opportunity to use more of our skills and backgrounds when we flip around. The other is very practical. It takes a long time to review a game, very long time. And this way we reduce the workload of the reviewer, who is, of course, very much unpaid to do this job. But I think for 2022, we're going to need to add some reviewers and go back to something closer to what we did in the past, where we had 4 guys do one game. So if you feel that you meet the job description, or not the job description, but the requirements that I've sort of outlined at the bottom there, then do feel free to drop me a line, and we'll include you in a list for consideration to add to the review group. And that, of course, goes for people who have done this in the past and wants to continue. So drop me a mail, or if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them as well using that email address. Okay, so this review system that comes up with some sort of number, how does it work? Well, the maximum score, as I mentioned, is 100. So how do you get the score? The final score is a combination of grades, which is the calls that you make or not make, and mechanics mistakes, graded situations. The other part of it is impression. And we need something in our game that, if you compare IFAF games to, for example, the NFL or a big time college conference, there's a lot of selection that goes into those people. They have been through selections and selections and selections. And once they reach whatever league they're in, they're pretty much operating within a fairly tight set of parameters, and they do things pretty similarly. In our game, that's not the case. We have a wide area of performances. I don't know exactly how to put it. So we need a system that also takes into account the intangibles, or sometimes very tangible intangibles. Things like appearance, your uniform, your movement, your body language, your communication, all those things that are difficult to quantify. We need to try to quantify them anyway, because they are important. So that's also a part of the system, and I'll tell you more what I mean about that when we progress in the presentation. So there are 7 different grades, and each grade has a set point value, and the maximum value is 10. Then there are 4 impression groups. I'll tell you about those soon, and they also have a set point value. Again, the maximum is 10. If you have a call that is not on tape, we can't see it at all, that will not be graded. It will be given a so-called grade of not graded, and they don't impact the score in any way. It's just like they didn't happen. In addition to grades, we have a lot of notes, written notes, comments, and that is perhaps where a lot of the learning takes place. It's in the written comments from the reviewer. Many times we might write something like, "Did you see it?" And I've gotten a lot of emails when we do that about people telling me, "Yeah, I saw it," or "No, I didn't see it." That's not necessarily the purpose of writing, "Did you see it?" It's so if you get this comment, "Did you see it?" It's more of a rhetorical question asking you to review your own focus on that play. Now, if you absolutely want to tell us if you saw it or not, especially if the grade is involved, sure, go ahead and send us an email. But otherwise, "Did you see it?" is more, review your mechanics. And if you did see it, well, all good. So moving on, these are the grades. Now, as I said previously, not graded does not mean anything for your score. It's just basically a non-event. Then you see the grades with the set point value. Correct call is obviously a call that you made. You threw your flag, and it was correct according to rule and philosophy, and that's 10 points. If that's also the default grade, so we want to give you a correct call. So that's where we start, and then we ask if there's a reason not to give you a correct call. If there is a reason not to give you a correct call, you might get the next grade, which is marginal call, which is worth 5 points, and that is a call that is technically correct, but according to philosophy or the game situation, we would rather see that you didn't call it. Basically, it was too technical usually, or simply didn't impact the play sufficiently, but was technically a foul. Incorrect call is worth 0 points, which is, of course, is the worst. And that simply means that the call was incorrect, or it was so far away from philosophy or mechanics that we're going to say it's incorrect. Obvious example that I've never seen happen: back judge calls false start on the quarterback. And if the quarterback did move or not, doesn't really matter. That is so far away from mechanics that we're going to say that's an incorrect call, just to give you a very obvious example. If you have a no call, which in grading terms means that you should have thrown a flag and did not, that's a no call. And that is worth 2 points. So as you can see, the worst thing you can do is to throw the flag when you should not have thrown the flag. So calling something that wasn't there is worse than not calling something that was there. That's why there's a weighting of those. Moving on, correct judgment is worth 10 points. Correct judgment is difficult calls involving judgment. Tight calls regarding a runner down, not down, fumble, pass fumble, complete, incomplete. Tight, difficult calls that you get correct. You might get an upgrade instead of the normal, which is a downgrade, except for correct call. And that's a correct judgment. Incorrect judgment, same type of situations, but now you made an incorrect judgment. He was out of bounds, but you call him in bounds, or something like that. The pass was incomplete, but you call it complete. Things like that. That would be an incorrect judgment. Incorrect mechanics is something that we have a lot of comments and notes on mechanics in our reviews. Certainly, by far, mechanics is what we comment the most on in the reviews. But having your mechanics commented may not necessarily lead to a downgrade. So an incorrect mechanic is something that you will get if a larger mistake is made. For example, you're a wing official and you have goal line responsibility. The ball is snapped from, let's say, the 4-yard line, and you don't move to the goal line. That is so important that will give you a downgrade immediately. But other smaller mistakes may just result in notes unless they keep on happening throughout the game, in which case they might add up to an incorrect mechanic. Then we have the impression group. So those things we talked about now are grades. This is the impression group, the other part that goes into your total, your final score. So for each quarter, for each period, the reviewer will put you in a group, and he will look at all these intangibles and the tangible intangibles and put you in one of these 4 groups. Group 1 is very small details left to work on, you appear to be ready to officiate the top games in Europe. 8 points is a good performance, but more room for improvement than the group one. And this is the default group. So you have to work your way out of group 2 somehow. Group 3 is an okay game, but not a solid performance. And group 4 is that you did not appear ready to work a game at this level. This is sort of, we've been doing this for some time, but it's sort of under trial still. Something that we see with reviewers, and I'm not only talking about Frank and myself, I'm talking about the last couple of years where we had more people doing this, is that we don't put a lot of officials in group 1. Very, very few, and perhaps too few. I think we might be too strict about putting people in group 1. So you could say, since you start in group 2 and get 8 points, I'll explain how this works later on, but basically the default score, if you have an okay game and you have no calls, you're going to wind up with 80 points. I'll tell you how that works later. So 80 is sort of a benchmark that you can sort of measure yourself against. So each time you get a grade, except not graded, which is just didn't happen, we call that an officiating event. And the impression grade is one officiating event per period. So each time you get a grade, hopefully you should get a grade that is worth 10 points, because that is the maximum. So the maximum score that you can get after the game is over, or maximum points, is the officiating events times 10. I have an example on the next slide that will make this a little bit easier to understand. So the number of points that you actually got is then totaled, and then you see how many percent of the attainable points did you actually get, and that is your final score. It sounds very difficult, but it isn't that difficult, or it sounds difficult to me because I'm not a numbers guy. Yes. So this is an example. I think this will explain it. So let's say that the game is over and we have reviewed your game, and there were 11 officiating events for you individually. So that means that you had 7 situations where you got a grade of some sort. And of course, you had 4 periods. So 7 plus 4 equals 11. In the best of worlds, where unfortunately we don't live, but in the best of worlds, that would give you 110 points, because 11 fishing events could result in 110 points at best. But let's say that you didn't get 110 points because you officiate in the real world. You got 84 once all the points are totaled up. Now, you could have gotten 110, you got 84. That's 76% of 110. So therefore, your final score is 76. So that's how that works. I hope that's understandable. So it's sort of a percentage system. So you were 76% successful in your quest for the perfect game, let's say. So last slide in my little presentation is an appeal to all the officials out there in officiating land with 2 things, at least the first one: penalty reports. Penalty reports are important. We've had, unfortunately, with a very limited number of games we had this year, we've had some examples of very poor penalty reports where numbers are wrong, calling officials are wrong, and it just makes it very, very difficult to give or to produce a review, an accurate review. If we don't know what you called and who called it and who you called it on, it's going to be difficult to know what happened out there, and the review will suffer as a result. And it's also it's a part of your responsibility as an official working an IFAF game, regardless of your position, is to do what you can to make sure we get a good penalty report. The last point is mostly for country contacts. if you have an IFAF game in your country, and this is as old as international football is in Europe, please help us get a game film uploaded. Without them, we can do nothing. And if your game is not uploaded, but it is on YouTube, that's better than nothing, a lot better than nothing. So let us know that your game is on YouTube, if that's the case. But we certainly prefer uploaded stuff to Huddle. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that, as they say, was it.
Okay, thanks, Einar. We have a few questions.
Thanks, Einar.
Einar,
Yeah.
thanks, Einar. Can everyone stay on mute, please? Please stay on mute. We have some. Can you stop sharing, Einar, and I'll show the questions.
I can't do anything. Well, there should be one more page that tells you where you can find the review manual if you want to know more about it, because there is a manual. But I don't know what's going on. I can't. I think you have to kick me out from sharing because.
Okay, how's that?
There we go. Okay. I have now
Okay.
stopped sharing.
Right, we have a few questions. I'll just share the questions, but I think Alex was going to come in and answer the first question, which was on the center judge. Alex, do you want to come in?
Sure. Sure. Thanks, Davey. Center judge, I know for you guys in Europe, still maybe a new concept. We've kind of settled in on it in the United States, and the question about being tighter and narrower versus depth and width is an interesting question. I think it's understanding the game that you're about to work, understanding the teams that you have that are participating in the game you're about to officiate. Do you have a tempo team? Do you have two tempo teams? Do you have two teams that hold consistently? That's going to dictate your depth. But the more accepted practice now is the center judge is essentially a second referee. So he is essentially mirroring the referee as far as position, as Einar alluded to, as far as width, as far as tighter, narrower than the referee. If you have a team that huddles all the time and goes slow, I would be parallel with the referee. If you have a team that's pushing you as far as tempo, I may be a yard or two in front of the referee, but still giving me an angle to assist the referee with pass fumble, hits on the quarterback, things of that nature. But the teams are going to let you dictate that. And as far as the comments that Einar was alluding to with the center judge, as far as not recognizing substitutions and all that, again, if you have a team that huddles up at the end of the down, I'm usually with them at the huddle or near their huddle, not necessarily going straight to the line of scrimmage because there's no need to if they're in a huddle. If I know I have a team that is tempo or semi-tempo, I may be somewhere between the huddle and the line of scrimmage until they do something that either dictates that I go to the line and stop them, or if the referee waves me off and moves us back to the backfield. But understand your situation. Width is important, so you have the angle. Depth is kind of dictated by whether you have a tempo team or not, a tempo team out there. But understand that you're basically a second referee, and you're there to assist with some of the pass fumble calls and hits on the quarterback, targeting, things of that nature. So the angle is important, but at the same time, your primary responsibility is substitution.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Alex. Appreciate that insight. Einar, can you answer Stuart and Michael's questions?
Yeah, I can, and they're both good questions and something that we have thought about ourselves and myself. First, Stuart's question: is there a grading in a situation where the philosophy has been correctly used to pass on a foul? No. Should there be? Yeah. How do we accomplish that? I think the only way we accomplish that is if we do what they do over there at higher levels, and that is that you actually report these things. You report that I passed on this for such and such a reason. I think that will be very difficult to have done in a consistent manner. So if we don't have a report, the only thing we can do is just pure guess that we think that you saw it and you passed on it. So that should give you an upgrade. But we will very seldom know if you saw it. Yeah, we're looking at where your cap is, all that stuff, but still, we don't know if you were actually saw it. So I would like there to be an upgrade, a positive effect on your score because you use good judgment in a situation like that. I just don't know how we're going to get there in anything that sort of resembles a uniform way. So if anyone has any great ideas, then you have my email address. Next question is also something that we've talked about, or at least I've thought about. Is a delay a game worth the same as, for example, those two situations? There are good examples of situations, and presently they are, because putting it into, for example, two different categories of technical calls and more judgment calls. I don't really like that name of judge because everything is pretty much a judgment call. But yeah, I recognize that there is a difference between these calls. But I find it very difficult to, if I want to keep the system, the grading system, the point system we have, I find it very difficult to find a way to put that in there where you don't actually wind up getting punished for making false start calls instead of roughing calls. So again, if anyone has any good ideas, I am certainly very interested in receiving them because it is something that would be nice if we could distinguish between. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Einar. And if you just bear with us, we were going to hand over